Hey everyone, today we are reviewing the new Netflix series Transformers War for Cybertron Siege, produced by our friends Rooster Teeth. Now, this is a new Transformers story. It is not based or related to the video game War for Cybertron, although that has some in common with it in terms of the story they're telling and the tone. But this is its own original thing. It's a darker Transformer story. That's what it was marketed as. It was like, this is the end of the Transformers, but it's also the beginning, because it looked like a prequel to the G1 series, the classic Transformers series. But it's actually a reboot. It's its own thing. It's telling its own story, and we'll get into it later, but I feel like it's going to have its own conclusive narrative. The show isn't going to end with them going to Earth and just setting up the events of the first series. This is its own thing. Now, I haven't got a chance to really talk about this on the channel. I might have mentioned it once in a podcast way back, but I am a huge Transformers fan. It's one of my favorite fandoms. I go all the way back to when I was a kid. It was like that, Power Rangers, Looney Tunes, and then all the other stuff I've talked about here on the channel. But I really, really love Transformers. I've seen damn near every Transformers animated series. I kind of fell off with the newer ones because I just wasn't a kid when they came out. The last one I really watched as it happened was that Transformers series that was on Cartoon Network. I can't remember the name of it. I think it might have just been called Transformers. I'll put it up right there. And then I didn't watch Prime when it came out, but I did go back and watch it on Netflix, and it's one of my favorite Transformers series. But myself, like many other Transformers fans, have a bit of a complicated relationship with the series, specifically in a post-Michael Bay world. Now, I enjoy those movies. Well, the first three. I have yet to actually watch 4 and 5. I really love the first Transformers movies. I enjoy the second one, even though I don't think it's that good, and I just don't care for the third one, even though I think that's a better movie than the second one. But Transformers is kind of, I don't want to say it's lost its way, because the franchise has always stuck true to what it believed in, even though it's based off, toys. But the movies set this narrative in terms of the greater sphere of entertainment of being like anti-film, right? Like they're the affront on cinema because it's all noise, it's all action, inappropriate, not all that feminist. But I'm not here to talk about those movies. I'm just bringing it up because there was a lot of frustration and real exhaustion with the franchise for many of its fans, like me and other YouTubers that I admire, like Andre, Black Nerd, and Lindsay Ellis. They've gone into depth talking about the issues they've had with the movies and the direction of the franchise, even though the cartoons and the comic books have been going strong the whole time, and they still have that original, I don't want to say mantra, but the original feel of Transformers that we all grew up with and loved. But we've always been looking for that big budget version of the Transformers that we know, because we really haven't had that since the movie back in the 80s, the first movie where Optimus dies and all that. And the closest we've ever had to that is Bumblebee, which is a pretty good movie. I really like it. It's not a perfect movie, but it was just so refreshing compared to the other 5 movies we got. And there were talks of them doing an animated, Paramount was going to do an animated Cybertron movie. I don't think that became this show because it's produced by Rooster Teeth, but it's kind of similar, and this is the closest thing we got. And I'm bringing this all up to tell you that this show was so refreshing. I went in wanting to like it. I'll be honest, the trailers weren't that. The trailers looked good, but the trailers didn't do justice to what the show is about and what it's like. Because this is one of my favorite Transformers things I've ever seen. I feel like Transformers Prime might be the best animated series, and I have a lot of nostalgia for like Beast Wars and Transformers Armada, when they were doing the anime stuff in like the mid 2000s. But this show has something that those shows don't, and it doesn't have the kind of annoying, not only human subplot that they have to shoehorn in, because we have to have humans because they're robots in disguise, they're on Earth, they have to have that human interaction even though we're trying to sell toys. But this also doesn't have that thing where it's trying to be a kid's show. Now, this show, it's rated as TY7 on Netflix. I don't think that's the correct rating for it. I think it really should be TVPG at the very least. I don't think this is quite TV-14. Like, this isn't the mature rated R Transformers that it may have appeared in the trailers. It's still very for everyone, although I think this definitely leans more towards adults. It's not anti-kids. It's somewhat kid-friendly, but I still wouldn't. It wouldn't be the first Transformers show I would show to a child to get them started on it, even though it might be the best. But we'll get into that later. So Siege really starts in the middle of the war between the Autobots and the Decepticons on Cybertron, and the Autobots are really losing that battle. Like, this is a very dire show. The circumstances are dire. We've always seen the Decepticons outnumber the Autobots in most cases, except for the first original series where they had like 20 of each on both sides, so they were selling toys. So every episode they'd show like a new guy that was just hanging out in the background that we didn't know about. Just to like, this is like Jetfire, he's the one that flies. But in this one, the Autobots are outnumbered basically 5-1 in terms of the Decepticons. And it plays with some really interesting things. I'll get this out of the way. I really, really like this show. So there's going to be a positive review. And from what I've seen, most people like this show too, which I'm happy about. But let's talk about what actually happens. There's going to be a spoiler-free review. And I have notes, but I don't have a script, so I'm probably going to ramble and talk with my hands a lot and lose my train of thought. So please bear with me. This is new for the channel. We're just trying it out. So War for Cybertron is very, I don't want to say, it is unique, but it plays with the lore of Transformers a lot. Like, this isn't an origin story, and it isn't, you know what it feels like? This feels like a big-budget comic book adaptation, because it's not a specific story that was plucked and made for the screen, like word for word, scene by scene. It borrows a lot from a lot of different Transformers that we've seen. The way it tells its story is very much like the IDW comics, which a lot of people consider the pinnacle of Transformers storytelling. But the comics told a very different world for Cybertron, the way they set it up, just the culture of the Transformers, than War for Cybertron does. Because in the comic books, and really in most shows that we've seen, even the movies to a degree, when they actually decided to actually talk about plot on occasion, they played with this idea that the Autobots and Decepticons were always equals on Cybertron, and then the Decepticons rose up and just caused havoc and tried to exterminate the Autobots because world domination, blah, blah, blah. But in War for Cybertron, there's this real classism caste system going on, where apparently you're born an Autobot or a Decepticon, and that predetermines what your life is going to be. If you're an Autobot, you get to basically live comfortably in Cybertron, and if you're a Decepticon, you have to work in the Energon mines. So, in this version, Metatron is like, he rises the Decepticons up in a revolution. But he does it by killing Alpha Trion, who was his and Optimus Prime and Ultra Magnus's mentor. Alpha Trion has been in the lore of Transformers for a long time. He's always treated like this sort of deity amongst the Autobots in some cases, and in other cases he's just Optimus's mentor, like in this one. But in this version, he's kind of like the, I guess, the Siddhartha or the Buddha of this race. I don't know what to call them. I just, besides the Transformers, they haven't said an actual race besides Autobots and Decepticons. And then Optimus and Metatron are like the two schools of thoughts that came out of that ideology. Optimus is kind of like the more peaceful, equality school of thought, and then Metatron is more of the violent, we're going to take what we deserve school of thought. And the Decepticons and Metatron are definitely the villains of the show, but it's not a very black and white show. It's a very gray show morally, because there are actually probably the most we've seen so far. There's a lot of Transformers sitting in the middle. We've seen that before in other shows, but in this one, there is a very big faction of named recognizable characters that don't agree with either side of the war. Like, that's what I love the most about the show, is that it plays with this idea that Optimus is just as responsible for the violence that we see in Transformers. It's because the fact that he didn't agree to Metatron's treaty, which basically would have subjugated the Autobots, caused the violence and all the death. And that weighs on Optimus. And this is probably one, if not my favorite portrayal of Optimus, because he's not really a Jesus character. Like, a lot of times he's this pillar of like, I don't want to say the American way, but he's a pillar of freedom and truth, and he basically just stands around and does a speech every once in a while he kicks butt. This version of Optimus is kind of learning as he goes. He's kind of impulsive, and you feel the stress of the weight of his responsibility really weighing on him, and in everything he does. Because this is probably the most mistakes I've seen an Optimus make. Like, the comics have kind of played with that, where Optimus has like this authoritative streak underneath his character, and you worry if he's out of touch or not. But in Siege, Optimus routinely is challenged by his subordinates, or his colleagues, I guess, his friends. Because that was one of the worst things that the Bay films did towards the end, was that the Autobots didn't get along. And it was like, why are these the good guys when the Decepticons are the ones like powwowing around? And this one kind of does that, but it's more so just like, yo, we're losing the war. Why are we doing it this way when it's not working? And they do some really interesting new interpretations of the characters. Like, if you're a longtime fan of Transformers like I am, you'll get a real kick out of seeing characters like Mirage, Jetfire, Impactor, Ratchet get these new sort of motivations in their characters that were never fleshed out before. Because you gotta remember, this is a show, I've said it like 3 times, this is a show that was built to sell toys. So Ratchet was the cranky medic. That was his character that came later on. But for the most part, back in the 80s, they were just, oh, he's the ambulance, so he's the medic. Like, take for example, Bumblebee. He is the most different out of all the characters that we've seen in Transformers in this version. Because he's always been played as like Optimus's little buddy, basically, right? Like, he's the loyal scout. He's kind of a scamp. But in Siege, he's a scavenger, a scrapper. He's basically like the Han Solo character for this story. He does not want to be in this conflict, and it's not till the very end when he's kind of forced into it, and he's started to become the character that we recognize. Good old Starscream is here, and he's just what you would want out of Starscream. He's always slimy. He does that thing where he's like, well, if I was in charge, we'd be doing this. And at first he directs that towards Jetfire, who is a Decepticon in this version, even though he's mostly an Autobot in the other versions, which is kind of interesting, because that's another thing that they pulled from another version, because in Transformers 2 Revenge of the Fallen, for the Michael Bay films, Jetfire was a Decepticon who, defected to the Autobots at the very end. And if you know Jetfire, again, this is spoiler free, but Jetfire becomes an Autobot at the very end. Like, you're not to be surprised when you see him there. But it's really cool, because he's sort of like the proto Starscream in this version. He's the leader of this group called the Seekers, which have been in other versions of Transformers as well, which is the Decepticon like Air Force, and Jetfire is in charge of it, and then like Starscream is like right below him, but he's always trying to needle him because he wants to be in charge. And then what I really like that this show does, it kind of sort of explains why Metatron would keep Starscream around so much when he literally just is always trying to betray everybody and be in charge. Basically, Metatron's like, I like that guy. He's got moxie, and it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. That's like a little nod to what fans have always talked about and liked. So it's just, there's not a lot of overt references to like other to other stories in the lore. Like, there's this certain like little wink nods to be like, oh, that's kind of like this. It's not like in Marvel where it's like, oh, like bing, there's an Easter egg. It's more so like, oh, so Starscream's like that, just like he is over here. That made sense. Like, oh, they say scrap, which has always been like a slang curse word in Transformers. But that's what I like, because this is very much a grittier, I don't want to say it's a darker version of Transformers like Titans for the Teen Titans or something like that, but it's a more mature, I guess, serious take on Transformers, but it doesn't necessarily ignore the inherent cheesiness and campiness of the show. There's not a lot of camp, there's not a lot of wink wink, but there's still a little bit of like, oh, that's kind of funny, right? Like, just the way the Autobots talk to each other, the way Wheeljack talks to Bumblebee in the first episode is hilarious. Like, Wheeljack sounds just like he does in the original series, which I think is cool. Like, you can tell that the people who made this show really love Transformers and have been watching Transformers for a long time, which is a lot of people's including mine, big issue with the Michael Bay films. It's like, he doesn't like Transformers. It made some money, so he makes a movie with them in it, tangentially. Like, he's much more interested in telling like Mark Wahlberg's story, or whatever Stanley Tucci's character in this version is, and then just have the Transformers there, because, oh yeah, it's a Transformers movie. Before Siege came out, I saw a video talking about how I didn't watch it, so I shouldn't judge it. But they're talking about how the show has a voice acting problem just from watching the trailers. And I'll admit again, the trailers did not do the show justice. It doesn't sound as good as the show actually sounds, and even the animation doesn't look quite as good. Like, the animation looks okay in the trailers, but when you watch it on Netflix on your TV, the show looks amazing. So, talk about the voice cast. A lot of people are going to turn it off because there's no Peter Cullen as Optimus. And he's definitely my favorite Optimus, but there's a precedent for other people besides him playing Optimus. Like, he had a different voice actor in Beast Wars, and Armada, and Cybertron, and I think, what was it called, Energon? Like, there was like 5 shows in a row that didn't have Peter Cullen as Optimus, and it was great. It was still just as good. I'm glad Peter Cullen kind of had a resurgence with the role with the movies, because he's one of the greatest performances I've ever seen, is him as Optimus. But to be honest, this show is on par for probably any of the other shows in terms of voice acting. It's good. I really like it. It's fine. It's better than fine. Like, because here's the thing. The original series, the voice acting, besides Peter Cullen and, like, Frank Walter, it's okay. Like, it's very 80s. It's very of the time. That doesn't make it bad, but let's not act like Transformers is some safe haven for voice acting. Or it's like, oh, they're spitting on the legacy because voice acting isn't as good. Like, it's par for the course for the rest of the series. I feel like Prime is probably a little better acted, but I like the way Cybertron tells its stories better than Prime. Because remember, Prime was on that show, not that show, that channel, The Hub. So it was still on a kids channel. So they had to tell kind of, they were still very serious stories and mature stories, but they had to do it in a lighter way where they have the subplot where like, oh, the kids want to go to a concert. No, they have to be with the Transformers. There's none of that in Siege because it's all on Cybertron. And I've always wanted a story with just Cybertron. Like, my favorite part of Bumblebee was the first 5 minutes where they battle on Cybertron. So I feel like they saw that part, and they saw how much people liked that part. So I was like, okay, let's just do that part for an entire show. And again, Peter Cullen is an Optimus, but his voice actor is really good. Like, he's not doing an impression of Optimus. It feels like a younger version of Optimus. I don't hear it, and I'm like, oh, that's not Optimus. I'm turning it off, which I'm sure some people have. But I personally like it, and I think it's fine. I really like how this show cares about its characters. Like, Alita 1. Alita 1 is basically, she's not like the female version of Optimus, but she's basically his counterpart, his girlfriend, depending on the version of the show. She was introduced in the G1 series. I think the episode was called like Girls Night. I'll put it up there, I don't remember. But it was when Optimus, Ratchet, and Ironhide go back to Cybertron for reasons. And then they see Alita 1, Chromia, and Moonracer, which is basically like their female counterparts. Because up until that point, the show is mostly just male robots. Like, people think RC is the first female Transformer because there's like a Mandela effect because she was in the movie. But really, Alita 1, Chromia, and Moonracer were first. And they were basically like palette swaps for Optimus and company. Like, it was like, oh, you boys, we'll handle it today because it was the 80s. This version of Alita 1 is probably my favorite because she has the most agency. And the way they explore her relationship with Optimus is very intriguing to me, and I really felt the emotions from how she felt about him, because you can tell that she really cares about him and she respects him and she wants to follow his lead, but she doesn't agree with every decision he makes, and she's worried that he's going to lead the Autobots down a path they can't come back from. And it's just, you see that eternal struggle inside her every time she's on screen where she's like, man, I just really care about this dude, but I don't know what the hell he's doing, which hasn't been explored in Transformers in a while. And I think that's so dope. Like, I'm not gonna say I got emotional watching the show, but I really felt the most connection with these characters, except for maybe Armada and Beast Wars back in the day. Like, those told pretty good stories, and you really cared about the Transformers. And in this version, it's much the same, but they ironically feel the most human that we've ever heard, because we don't have to see them interact with the humans. We don't have that fish out of water thing where it's like, oh, I can't tip this thing over because I'll break the house because I'm so damn big. Because they're at home. We're seeing them in their prime. And yeah, this show is dark, but it's not dark for the sake of being dark. It's just showing how messed up and tiresome war can be, and how really the Autobots were not doing well before they made it to Earth. And I was really pleasantly surprised that for the most part, except for one at the very end, there's not a lot of named characters just getting picked off. Like, I thought Wheeljack was going to get killed in the first episode the way they set it off, but it didn't happen that way. Like, they treated the characters with respect. It's like I said, except for like the first scene in the last episode, there's like one part where something really messed up happens to a Transformer that it really was kind of unnecessary. This isn't a spoiler review, like I said, but you'll see the part and you'll know what I'm talking about. I was really interested in this versus Metatron because he's still like the villain, but he's not like this force of outside evil that just wants to destroy everything. Like, in his own way, he wants peace. He just wants the Autobots to be subjugated to him because he's basically won the war at this point. Like, Metatron's arc has always been him trying to rule Cybertron, and then in this one, he basically is in charge of Cybertron. Like, Decepticons are the majority of the world. They're the ones that are inside the cities chilling. He just needs the Autobots to officially surrender. You don't know if he really cares about the Decepticons or not. Like, he uses it as an excuse to justify his beliefs to Optimus, where it was like, I because of me, these people rose up, and now they have a better life, while you kept them down. But you don't know if he really believes that or not, because it's Metatron. Maybe he's just using this because he wants power. But it's really interesting to see him as like a political figure and an actual leader, where he is like, because there's a part, so the inciting thing that sets up the entire plot for basically episodes 2 through 6, which is all the episodes except for the first one, is that Optimus learns through plot stuff that Metatron is looking for the Allspark, which if you are a Transformers fan, you know about the Allspark. In some versions, it's basically the Matrix of Power, but in this version, the Allspark is something different. It's this myth that's inside somewhere in Cybertron, and it's like the lifeblood of Cybertron. But there's a lot of myths about it. A lot of old religions is what they call it, that believe in the Allspark, and not a lot of Transformers believe in it or even know what it does if it is real. But basically, Shockwave comes up with this idea that if we get the Allspark, we can override the DNA code of the Autobots, and then they'll be Decepticons. And then Optimus hears about this, and he's like, we have to find the Allspark before Metatron gets it, because it's the state of our people. If we don't find it, we'll die. And then like Elita 1 is like, but we don't have the resources, we're dying. And Optimus is like, we have to get it, we just have to get it. But this is actually a little bit of misinformation, because Metatron actually doesn't want to go for the Allspark. Because when Shockwave tells him, he's like, man, I can't, like, it's really interesting. It's the most interesting character choice I've seen for Metatron ever. Because he's like, man, I don't want to waste manpower looking for this thing that may or may not exist when I should be fighting the Autobots. And 2, I can't just decide to overwrite an entire race's DNA right there on the spot. Like, that's so interesting to see from Metatron, like the grand villain of the franchise, be like, yo, even I can't do that just right on the spot. I need to think about that. But then Metatron finds out that Optimus knows about the potential for the Allspark, about Shockwave's plan, and then he automatically is like, I'll use that against Optimus, because he force feeds with the help of Soundwave the location of where the quote-unquote Allspark is to Optimus, and he immediately sends out a party to go find it, and then the Decepticons ambush them. But then when that doesn't work, Metatron's like, okay, I'll just use that to further my message. Like, this is a very, very smart version of Metatron. Because, like, Metatron's always been intimidating, but there are versions of him where it's like, he's kind of dumb for keeping Starscream around for so long, and he never wins against the Autobots. So his intelligence has been questioned before. But in this version, he's very cerebral, and there's a very modern political undertone to the show in the way that truth, especially truth in wartime, isn't this simple thing, and it's not solid. It's very fluid. Because once the ambush doesn't work, Metatron gets on his little PA, because Metatron does a bunch of propaganda throughout the show to other Decepticons. And he's like, I've learned that the Autobot extremist Optimus Prime is looking for the Allspark, and he plans to destroy us all. Because there's a myth that if you take the Allspark off of Cybertron, the world will implode. So Metatron very smartly uses this to his advantage to shift the narrative into his favor, which we haven't seen a lot in Transformers. Usually in Transformers, it's all a lot of, we'll just shoot him, we'll blow him up, we'll fight. But in this one, they use information as a weapon, which is very cool because there's a lot of characters, especially Decepticons, where that's so much in their wheelhouse, like Shockwave, Soundwave, Sideways. There's a lot of characters like that who use information, especially like this is where the show feels like a comic book a lot, and that's very refreshing because it's not just one shall stand, one shall fall. We're gonna fight and punch. There's a lot. Well, okay, I'll use Optimus's own nature against him to win, because they've done that before, where it's like, oh, Optimus can't help but save the humans. So I'll just try to kill the humans, and then I'll kill Optimus when he's so busy. But in this one, it's like, okay, I'll use Optimus's own personality against him. I'll use his own actions to really stack the cards against him. And I really thought the class aspect of it was interesting, because there's a lot. You don't get to know the Decepticon grunts a lot in other shows, but in this one you get like a front row seat to how like the lower Decepticons think and feel. And a lot of them truly believe in the message that Metatron has purported, that they deserve better, that they've been neglected by the Autobots because they're a lower class. And that's really intriguing to me, because it's just I'm not used to seeing that out of Transformers where they're that layered, because a lot of times it's like the Decepticons are bad except for the ones that defect, right? If you're a newcomer to Transformers, you might be lost a little bit, because again, like I said, the story starts in the middle of this conflict, so there might be a little bit of an adjustment, but the way it tells the story, it's so focused on what's happening, you probably won't be bothered too much, because it's like, okay, they're robots, they fight, that's good enough for me. But if you're a big fan, a longtime fan like I am, this is probably the show you've been waiting for, because there's just such attention to detail with different characters. Like Optimus and Bumblebee are probably the main. So it goes Optimus, Bumblebee, Alita 1. Those are like the big characters. But then you still get to see the side cast, which is one of Transformers' biggest strengths. Because Mirage will be the focus for a little bit. Sideswipe you'll see a little bit. RC and Hound come in towards the middle. So it's like, okay, if you're a fan of any show, you'll see, like, oh, there's Red Alert. He's from that one. There's Hound. He's from the classic one. Oh, there's Ironhide at the very end. So you get to see them like, oh, I know that guy, which is very cool, because in the movies, it's like, I know that guy, he's dead. He just got killed. In my video I did on Ruby Volume 1, I said that while I didn't necessarily dislike this choice, I did feel the ending was a little abrupt, and this is kind of the same. Although this is very much a part 1, and it's always been marketed as a part 1. So it's not like the ending just comes out of nowhere, like, oh, we're done. The action and the conflict builds and builds up until the point where you would assume it would build to. And then it's over and then sets up part 2. It's not like a big wink wink, here's the next sequel bait thing. It's more so like, okay, this is where that part of the story ends, and here's a hint of where the story is going next. Which is, some people have already called it a little too short for its own good. I think it was just the right amount of length for me, because there's 6 episodes and they're 24 minutes each. So you've put them all together, it's basically the length of Age of Extinction, the 4th Transformers movie. And I was able to binge it in a day. And I am very bad at binging historically. So it was very cool for me to just be able to, like, okay, I sit down and I watched the whole thing. And I was like, oh, I want more, but I'm satisfied. I can just live with what I got so far and think about what happened while I wait for the next part. And if you only watch Transformers and you watch nothing else, and this is the show you were planning on watching, you're gonna feel like, oh, well, what do I do now? But this is a great show to watch in tandem with other shows, because this dropped last Thursday, and then Friday dropped Umbrella Academy Season 2 on Netflix, so I was able to just finish Transformers and then go right into Umbrella Academy. So that was cool for me personally. I talked about the voice acting. I thought the sound was very good. All-star cast. There's a lot of veterans in it, like Joe Zisha. Keith Silverstein does a very good Jetfire. Like, there's this thing I like. There's so much of little intangibles that I can't quite describe that I just write about Transformers. Because when Jetfire starts off as a Decepticon, he talks very much with that sinister tone, like Cheeto in Persona, where he's like, we will kill the Autobots, you know. But then when he defects into the Autobots, his voice has changed a little bit. Like, it's not a different voice, but it's more like, I got your back. So which is a very old school Transformers thing, where if like you're on a different side, you sound just a little bit different. Like if you're a Decepticon, your voice is a little more rough and a little more sinister. But then if you become an Autobot, it's the same voice, but it's a little more light. And it's just a nerdy thing that no one else probably cares about. But that felt very much like Transformers to me. So that was cool for me to see. this is probably the most attractive the Transformers have ever looked. Because if you look at the old school series and then a lot of them afterwards, they're very humanoid. But then in the post-Bay movie world, they've emphasized the mechanical aspect of it more. It's very spiny, a lot of sharpness to a lot of their designs, especially in like Starscream and RC. But in this one, they're very there's going to be a lot of people who want to have relations with these Transformers. Like they wouldn't be furries, would they be shinies? I don't know. Let's not focus on that too much. I can't say if this is the most I've cared about the characters of Transformers before, because I've always cared about them whenever I watch the show. But I felt the emotional weight. I probably already said that, but I felt the emotional weight a lot. Like especially with Optimus and Elita 1, this is my favorite version of their relationship, where it's like it's a very real human relationship where there's struggle because Optimus appreciates her loyalty, but he knows that he's putting a lot on her, and he apologizes. Or there's this great scene you saw in the trailer where it's like, this isn't the life I thought we'd have, which is the most confirmation we get that they're in a relationship. Like it kind of plays loose with the fact like she touches his arm a lot, she looks at him a lot, where it's but he does not like, oh, this is my girlfriend, this is my boyfriend. But that one scene is what hammers home like, okay, there was something before the war, because in the original series they were like Optimus and Elita were these separate beings before because then they were killed by the Decepticons, and then they became, because of Alpha Trion and the Guardians or whatever they were called, they turned into these idealized versions of themselves. Like he was Orion Praxis as a civilian, and then when he died he became Optimus Prime, and then Elita 1 was Ariel before she died and got reborn in this ultra robot form, even though they were robots then. It was weird. But in this one, they were something before that. Like, because they play with this idea that Alpha Trion led this revolution against some other group that was in control of the Autobots and the Decepticons before. And Optimus and Metatron were his two pupils. But then, after the war, Metatron made it about the Decepticons versus the Autobots. Because Optimus believes in the same thing that Metatron believes in, but he doesn't believe in lowering the Autobots into the same level as the Decepticons. He believes in raising them into the same equal space. But anyway, I'm rambling. I really like the show. And thankfully, it seems like a lot of Transformers fans do. I don't know what the rating is on like Tomatoes or any other responses, but for the most part, I've seen mostly, if not all, really, really happy responses to the show. Like, people are really glad that this show is a thing, is what we're waiting for. It's infinitely watchable. Like, I'll probably watch it again. That's how good it is. Especially because how brief it is. I can just watch it again. Especially when we did confirmation for season 2, or part 2, when that's going to happen. My only concern is that at the end, they very much set up that they're probably going to Earth. And then I believe part 2 is called Earthrise, so they're definitely going to be on Earth. I'm worried, I'm cautious about bringing humans into this story with the way the animation is and with the way they've told the stories, because they've finally just focused on the Transformers. Like, just them, and we got to see them in their own society and how they live their lives. Granted, the way they wrote these characters, it'll be interesting to see them interact with humans and seeing how they write humans, but I just hope that it doesn't bog them down too much telling an Earth story. Like, I hope it's not just what we've seen before. I hope they find a new way to kind of freshen up the Robots in Disguise storyline, because my least favorite part about the Transformers is probably the fact that they transform. I just like that they're robots with these human wants and philosophies. I think that's all I have to say. I had notes, I ignored them mostly, and I just rambled. Who knows how this video is going to turn out to be. If I had to grade the show, it's a hot rod out of 10. It's very good, I really liked it. It's not quite the best yet, but there is potential. Anyway, thank you for watching this. We got Transformers, baby. It's a good time to watch stuff. It's not a good time to be in the world, but it's a good time to just hunker down and watch stuff. And I'm just very happy as a Transformers fan. I'm really happy that this thing is around. I can't wait to see. I'm definitely down for 2 more parts, and probably even more after that. I'll be down if they do more. Anyway, I've been Ben. Thank you for dealing with this new video, this new format, and my rambling. Take care, be safe, be kind to each other, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.